You know, one of the fundamental tenets of Grain Brain has been that inflammation is a cornerstone player in so many diseases that in fact affect the brain. Things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. May be surprising that these are actually inflammatory disorders. Let's take a look at this first slide. And what you see here is that, in fact, inflammation is the cornerstone of things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, MS, stroke, depression, and even ADHD. But what is really very exciting is we're now learning that the source of this inflammation actually has to do with the balance of gut bacteria. So it turns out that this microbiome, this collection of microorganisms and their genetic material that reside within the human gut, play a huge role in inflammation. Again, the cornerstone of these very devastating situations. This is a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science in 2010. And it looked at the fecal microbiota, the bacteria that live within the gut of children living in Europe compared to those living in Burkina Faso, which is in Western Africa. And it looked at the specific fingerprint of these bacteria, comparing the fingerprint, the complexion of these bacteria of the African kids versus those living in Europe. Now here's a map that shows exactly where Burkina Faso is, just near the equator. This is what the village of Bupan looks like. So you can see it's a very rural area. This is the type of dwelling that the people live in. And here is one of the individuals making this tow, which is ground millet and sorghum. And I think you'd agree that these are not the most hygienic conditions to be creating food. That said, here's what it looks like. And what they've looked at are the actual bacterial complexions of the African versus the European gut contents. And you see, when I simplify the slide, that the main groups of bacteria, the firmicutes and the bacteroidetes, are vastly different when comparing the African versus the European children. And this has a huge role to play in terms of the products that the gut makes. And in this case, we're looking at what are called fatty acids, the short-chain fatty acids that have a very important role to play, not just in general physiology and health issues, but perhaps more importantly, for our discussion, play a huge role in terms of brain health. Now, beyond that, let's take another look at these slides. And you'll see that there's also a significant difference in the levels of certain what are called gram-negative bacteria. Huge difference is what I'm saying then in looking at the gut contents of those children living in a rural environment, in a perhaps less hygienic situation compared to those kids eating a more westernized diet. And the authors had a very interesting conclusion, and I'd like to read that to you. Here's what they said. Our results suggest that diet has a dominant role in shaping the gut microbiota. We can hypothesize that the reduction in richness we observed in the European gut contents compared with the African children could indicate how the consumption of sugar, animal fat, calorie-dense foods in industrialized country is rapidly limiting the adaptive potential of the microbiota. Now, why this is important and what we emphasize in the new book, Brain Maker, is the critical, fundamental role of the gut bacteria, not just in terms of general health, but in terms of brain health as well. Our gut bacteria represent our first line of defense. They mediate our levels of immunity, our metabolism, determine to a great degree whether we'll be fat or lean, modulate our blood sugars, and even control the production of neurochemistry. So what the study is telling us is this is not a genetic thing. This is related, oddly enough, to our food choices, something very important to consider. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter.